book of Genesis, I want to start off with a few verses here. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's a long time. Everything. The thoughts of the heart was only, that's the only thoughts they were thinking was evil thoughts, and it was just a continual, they were just continually evil. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. The Lord was sorry. His heart was grieving. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. So the earth was so vile, so wicked, that God mandated the death and destruction of man, beast, and the earth. But there was somebody who was different. And the Bible reveals why this person was different. But Noah, we all know the story of Noah's flood, don't we? But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So that's why he was different. He found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Why was Noah the only one who did that? Maybe he's the only one that was looking. It was there. Noah was a preacher of righteousness in the New Testament. It says he was preaching, letting people know. So he found God's grace, God's good favor, given as a free gift to everyone who asked. So what does that grace-filled life look like? Now we're talking about walking with God. So if Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, let's take a look at how he was living. Noah was a just man. He was honest. He was righteous. You could trust his word. Remember the old day when a handshake was good? Now you got to get a lawyer for everything. You could shake his hand and know that what he said was good. He was perfect in his generation. He wanted to do what was right. Noah walked with God. Noah was walking with God. Noah walked with God at a time when the earth was wicked and ripe for destruction. Noah is a witness that we can walk with God no matter how corrupt, vile, or wicked our world is. If Noah can do it, what about us? We can do it too. I heard it. We can do that too. And Jesus said, as in the days of Noah, so will also be the coming the days of the Son of Man. And we like to focus on the wickedness, but the book of Revelation talks about the saints who keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. So Noah is also a type of the last generation on this planet. The earth is completely vile and wicked, that God will have a people, not just a family, known as family when that are. God will have a people who will be faithful, who will walk with him. So, wicked environment, God can reach through and help you be victorious. And you be walking with God. That means in harmony with God, a friend of God, loyal to God. You and God are working together, and he's helping you, and you're trusting him. Walking with God, honoring God. Now, let's take a look at another person. I used a slide last time I spoke when Abraham was how old? 99 years old. Not a spring chicken, although he just started a second family at about that age. The Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am Almighty God. Walk before me and be what? Blameless, just like Noah. Walk before me and be blameless, and I will make my covenant between me and you, and will multiply you exceedingly. So God makes a new covenant with us, and he wants us to walk before him and be blameless. So Abraham is a witness that even in your old age, you can walk with God. Noah in a wicked generation, Noah, an old man, and God's telling him, you can be faithful to me. So old age, even in our old age. Now you've heard the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Have you heard that? You've heard it. That's people's excuse for not wanting to change, right? But when it comes to human, that kind of falls apart. letting him down. I'm the favorite wife. He loves me more than you. And just driving Hannah crazy. And her husband Elkanah did love her. So she went to the temple and prayed, Lord, I need a child, help me. The priest thought she was drunk. And what did the priest do? Came over and rebuked her and says, no, for sorrow of heart. No, I don't have a child. So she went away blessed, and she had Samuel. And she decided to dedicate Samuel as a young boy to the temple. And he went to the temple, and Eli was the high priest. And Eli wasn't the most faithful high priest. He was an indulgent father because he had two sons who were wicked, stealing the offerings, taking advantage of the woman coming to the temple. He knew about it, and he would say, oh, sons, please don't do that anymore. That's not good. What they did is, you're fired. No more in the temple. You're banned. But he didn't. He didn't use his authority. So one day God said, enough's enough. And here's where we pick up the story. Now the Lord came and stood and called, as other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel answered, speak, for your what? Servant hears. Here's this young kid, and he realizes his position in God's kingdom. Something Eli and his sons forgot. He was a servant. Speak, Lord. I'm humbling myself before you. What did you say? I want to hear. Your servant. I'm your servant. So at a young age, Samuel was a servant of God. Actually, Samuel was the youngest priest, holding the highest title. Okay? I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Samuel was the youngest priest holding the lowest title. He was a priest in training, but as a young person, he had the highest rank. Samuel was a servant of God. Youngest priest in training, but what was he? He was above everybody else because he was God's servant. And he actually became a priest and a prophet. So Samuel is a demonstration that culture and youthfulness is no barrier to walking with God. Noah, wicked generation, walked with God. Abraham, an old man, 99, walking with God. Samuel, a little boy in a corrupt priesthood with Eli and his sons. What's he doing? Walking with God, serving God. Speak, Lord, I'm listening. Speak. So they're witnesses to us. And they're not alone. In the Bible, we find a lady called Tamar. She's the one on the bottom here. That's not really her. It's a picture best I could find on it online. Then there's someone called Rahab the harlot. We're going to talk about these ladies today. Ruth the Moabite and Bathsheba. Let's get into it. Tamar comes on the scene. She was a Canaanite. So her line goes from Noah to Ham's son Canaan, and then the Canaanites came out of that, and eventually they became a corrupt tribe. So she came out of that. And she shows up on the scene because Judah married a Canaanite woman, had 3 sons. The oldest was E-R. And when he was old enough to get married, Tamar married him. So she was a Canaanite marrying this Israelite. And he died, and there was no children. So what happened in Israel when an Israelite man died, he had a wife and no children, there was a law that the nearest relative would raise up a seed, go in, sleep with the widow, hopefully there'd be a son, and then the inheritance would go on. So what did Noah do? He went, after died, he went to Onan, his second, and said, you need to raise up a seed to your brother. So Onan didn't do it right. And actually, God killed for being wicked, and God killed Onan for not doing can you imagine that? For not doing this, the near kinsman. But there was a younger brother, Shelah, and Judah said, no, he's a little young, so Tamar, when he gets older, you can marry him. Go to your father's house as a widow, and at the right time, I'll give you the husband. So what is she doing every year? She's keeping an eye on who? Shelah. And he's growing. And then it hits her, you know what? He's old enough to marry me. And Judah's not delivering the goods. Why did she need a son. She's living in her father's house with no husband. What happens when her father dies? Who's going to support her? No husband, no father. She realized the time, I need that inheritance. It's my right to have inheritance. And Judah is not being a man of integrity, and he's holding back his son. So she says, okay. She's thinking, and she has a plan. And then somebody tells her, hey, Judah, he's going on this road to take a little trip somewhere. So she says, okay. So what she do? She gets to that road early. She sits down and she covers her face. And Judah, his wife had died by this time, so he was single. And he sees her and he thinks, oh, a prostitute. So he goes over and says, can I come into you? And she says, what are you going to give me? I'll give you a goat. Well, you have no goat with you. I need some surety. He says, well, what do you want? I want your rod, I want your signet, and I want your cord. And when you come back with the goat, I'll give these back to you. So he goes into her, leaves, and gets her pregnant. 3 months later, she's like this. And what's everybody thinking? She's no husband. She's played the what? She's played the harlot. So when they go, hey, Judah, Tamar's pregnant. Take her out and burn her with fire. So they're going to burn her with fire. And she says, hold on, guys. The father of my baby is the man who owns this rod, this signet, and this cord. Go give him to Judah so he knows who the father is. So they show up. They give him the rod, the signet, the cord. He's like this, okay. And here's what he says. She is more righteous than I. Because he realized this came about because of his neglect to obey his word. And she has twins from him. And the oldest is Perez. And Perez is in the lineage of David and Jesus. So God worked it out for her not only to have the near kinsmen, but to have her son be part of that family tree of David. So there was something about her. I'm not sure about the way she did it, but anyways, God honored it because she took it in her hands because Judah was not faithful. 280 years later, Israel, after 40 years of wandering in the desert, come to across the Jordan River, and there's a place called Jericho. Big walls. And that was a Canaanite city. So the Canaanites are back in play again. But by this time, according to Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 17, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite, just as the Lord your God has commanded, you shall utterly destroy. So this time, that city was under a death decree to be completely destroyed. So the Israelites said, what do? We got to send a couple spies and scout out the city. So they send 2 spies, and in time, they come to Rahab's house, and they need to be hid. And Rahab was a harlot. I think probably a prostitute living on the city wall. So she heard the stories about what was going on, about the Israelites, people coming in and out of the city gates. So people were telling all the great deeds of God. So she says, come with me up on the roof, and she covers them with flax. And they come looking for her, for the spies. And she says, oh yeah, they've gone out the way. And she protected them. Then they had an agreement that if she would not tell on them, that they would save her house. But it's interesting, she tells them, and as soon as we heard these things, all the acts of God, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you, for the Lord your God. Here's where she started her walk. We're talking about walking with God. This is where she got off the Jericho road, and she got on God's road. He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. And now she's joined in a harlot, a Canaanite harlot, with a death decree to burn the Canaanites. Well, they destroyed the city. And what did she do? She jumped ship. She got off a sinking city onto the city's builder and maker of God. She started walking with God. She probably was young. She didn't have any children as we know of. And here she is walking with God. And after her family was saved, she met a Hebrew from the tribe of Judah named Salmon. And they had a child. And that child is in the lineage of David and Jesus. You know, Jesus had Canaanite blood in his veins from Tamar and from Ruth. Amazing, isn't it? Amazing. So here's this woman of ill repute, I guess. We don't really know exactly her whole life. But God used her to save the spies, find the right man, and from their seed, David was going to come as a king of Israel. It's amazing. It's amazing how God reaches people. God reached her. God can reach us. If she can walk with God and confess God in heaven above and on earth beneath, if she believed, we can believe. All these stories are there for us to be faithful. Now we come, years later, to Ruth the Moabitess. Elimelech and Naomi go down to Moab. Moab, they came from what heritage? Do you remember? Lot and his daughter. They were a nation of incest, born out of incest. Remember after the city was destroyed, Lot and his daughters went up into the mountains, and one of them cooked up the story. Let's get our father drunk and we'll have children from him and keep his seed alive. So the Moabites came, and the Moabites were not friendly to Israel. They were the ones who called Balaam to curse Israel. So they were not friendly towards God. So Elimelech, Moab, and their two sons go to Moab, and Ruth marries Mahlon, the oldest, and the second one married another girl. And a short time later, Elimelech dies, Mahlon dies, the other brother dies. So now we have three widows, Naomi and the two young ones. And Naomi says, hey, nothing here for me. I got to go back. God's cursed me. Life is bad. Life stinks. And I'm out of here. So the two daughter-in-laws want to go with her. And she says, no, don't really need to go with me. I don't have any babies. I can't have a husband. I can't give you any sons that you can marry later on, because they understood that birthright. So I can't do that because I'm not having any more children. Well, what does Ruth do? Here's what Ruth says when Naomi tried to turn her away. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave you or turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, say it with me, my God. Ruth started walking on the path. Jesus said there's a narrow path, and that's a path we need to trouble. This Moabitess, poor as dirt, with nothing. What's she doing? She's jumping off the Moab road and onto God's road. And what's she doing? She's walking with God. So they get back to the old homestead. Apparently, before they left, they must have sold it or rented it out, but they were staying in the house. They had no money, so Ruth would go out, and she would glean from the fields. It was the barley harvest. And she's gleaning, and she meets up with Boaz. And Boaz says, who's this? Oh, that's Ruth, came back with Naomi. She's taking care of her. Oh, I heard of her. She's a good woman. And her and Boaz have a little spark going on. Do you know Boaz knew who his grandmother was? Rahab the harlot. Might have been his great-grandmother. So Rahab the harlot has a son, bang, 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 and then there's Boaz. So Boaz is part Canaanite. And what does he do? Falls in love with a Moabite, and they have a son. I think Rahab was Boaz's grandmother, and then Ruth comes on the scene. Her and Boaz get married, and they have a son, and then they have another son, and then David. So that means Ruth was David's great-grandmother. Tamar, Ruth, and Rahab the harlot were all in Jesus' bloodline, and all of them walked the road, God's road, as young people. None of them had children. They were probably teens, maybe early 20s. And what did they do? They gave their heart to Jesus. And interesting about the Moabites, there's a law here about the Moabites. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, here it is. Deuteronomy 23:3. An Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of his descendants shall enter the assembly of the Lord forever. So there's a decree against the Canaanites not to enter in. Or to destroy them. Here, the Moabites were excluded. But what happened? When these ladies gave their heart to Jesus, they were taken out and they were put into God's kingdom. Let me ask you a question. Do we have a death decree on us today? What's the wages of sin? Death. We're no better than these ladies. They're us. These stories are us. None of us were born probably Israelites. Rahab, probably born on the wrong side of the city. Maybe she was a prostitute because she had no other way to make money. Tamar, desperate woman, needed to get a husband. She needed to get a baby. She needed something for the inheritance, so she concocts a plan to trick Judah. God used it and gave her a child in Jesus' lineage. And here's a widow from Moab, and the Moabites have been excluded from God's kingdom. What is she? She's part of David's lineage. I'm going to move ahead here. Running out of time. Now, the question is lineage enough to get Ruth, Tamar, and Rahab the harlot into heaven? It's not lineage, is it? Something else had to happen. Now, they're in their lineage as women who were superior, faithful women. Well, here's a picture of my family. That's my brother David, my dad, my sister Cheryl, my sister Nancy, and then my brother Kevin. Now, he has a different color skin. So how could he be my brother? He was adopted. This makes 60 years he's been part of our family. 60 years. I was 3, he was 2 when he joined the family from Lebanon. Little brown-skinned boy shows up. My mother says, "You two are so rambunctious." And we look at each other, us? No, we were good kids. We caused no trouble. But he was a what? He was adopted. My father died a few years ago when the will was read. He was adopted. What type of portion of the inheritance do you think he got? Exactly. Split 5 ways. 5 ways. He got an equal portion because he was adopted. And that's how we get on the road. This is called walking with God. You need to be adopted into God's family. And then you're on the path. It says here, New Revised Standard, Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5, He predestined us for adoption as His children through Jesus Christ, according to the good pleasure of His will. So God was happy to take us as orphans, people with a death decree on us, to adopt us into His family as His children. You are a 100% child of God if you've given Him your heart and you're walking with Him. We get on the path by adoption. We walk the road into His kingdom by adoption. God says, you were lost, now you're found. You want to be part of my family? I'll take you in, and at my good pleasure, I'm happy to do it. Sometimes there's a need in the family. Maybe if someone dies and the children need to go somewhere else and the family don't have any money, what are they doing? They're scratching their head. How do we can't afford any more mouths in this house. Now, where are we going to sleep? God doesn't say that. He's saying, I got plenty of room in my house. I got many mansions. Welcome in. So adoption is how we start the journey with Jesus. Now we're in his kingdom. James 2:5. Listen, my beloved brethren. Has God not chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he promised to those who what? Well, if you love him, you're an heir to the new earth. You have a portion allotted to you equal with every other person when you walk with God. It says, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation to everyone who what? Believes. So when you believe, you have salvation. You have eternal life. At the point when you believe, then you're walking with God. And because you believe in God, Jesus has adopted you into his kingdom. You have become heirs of the inheritance, and you have a certain right. Right? When the will is made, you have rights in that will. If the person made the will out, left you those rights. And no one can deny you. And here it is. Blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have what? The right. When you're adopted into the kingdom, you have a right to the tree of life and may enter through the gates where? Into the city. You have a right to the tree of life. What happens when we eat from the tree of life? Eat and live forever. Nothing can stop you. God has ordained it, that if you are adopted and you are walking the path and you are faithful to God and you love him and you keep his commandments, you're going to go through those gates with your head up high. You're heading to that tree of life, and the Father's going to say, welcome, son, welcome, daughter. Thank you for being faithful. And here you go. Here you go. Next week we'll do part 3, and let's have a closing prayer.